It is Friday, January 13th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so hopefully this week sounds better. I know that last one was really bad. I'm sorry, but you can see that we are filling in more of this side of the room. That's good. I still have to do this back area and also this corner right here, but over time at least, it is going to sound better. I just have to, soundproof this room in a way that my last one I didn't have to, because I'm going from, the last place was carpet to now hard floors. It's obviously bigger, the ceilings are higher, so I just have to, that way I don't have to mess with the audio and post every episode. But we're getting there, because this has been such a slow process for me where I've never had to furnish a whole house before. So bear with me. With that said, we have some PlayStation news to go over. So first up, as always, our PS Plus reminder. The January PS Plus Essential Games are live, so claim those, get that done and out of the way. The PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup has been announced for, they're going to go live on the 17th, this coming Tuesday, of course. And PS Plus Extra is looking good, obviously. About, 8-9 titles. Nothing crazy. I mean, at this point, we're kind of settling into PS Plus Extra. We expect that it's going to be 8 to 12 titles on average. So, that sort of honeymoon phase is over. Now we can sort of really judge these titles a bit more. So there's some, good stuff in here, like Back 4 Blood if you want to try that. There's Devil May Cry 5 on PS5, Dragon Ball FighterZ PS4, Erica PS4, also Jet the Far Shore. Sony was promoting that indie for a bit, so you can try that as well if you didn't have the chance before. But it's all around a decent to good month. And for PS Plus Premium, well, as you'd expect, 3 games, which is more than some months, but they're all PS1 titles, and kind of a natural thing, right? We all expected that at some point we're going to get Hot Shots Golf 2 and Siphon Filter 3, so they're there. Also, Star Wars Demolition, so by PS Plus Premium standards, I guess it's serviceable. But I would still like to see at least, kind of what we see with Extra. Like, let's throw 8 to 12 games on there, especially if we're sharing this entire tier with, multiple platforms at this point, right? So PS1, you would hope 2 at some point, which I'm predicting that'll happen eventually. 2, 3, PSP, of course. So, yeah, it's not great. Anyway, going into our first story, we have a new PS5 system software update, this one 22.02, 06.50, and this one includes not only the minor improvement to the overall system performance, but it now also supports the DualSense Edge as well. So when that controller comes out later this month, your PS5 is ready to go. And I would assume once you connect it to your PS5, because right now there's nothing actually on there showing that it is ready, but that's where it should open up the range of software features that the DualSense Edge has. And well, really they're exclusive features to that controller, which obviously they're going to paywall a lot of things behind what is a $200 premium controller. But it is still pretty bogus that when it comes to the adjustments for the analog stick dead zones, which is very much a software level thing, it's on the PS5 UI, your PS5 just got updated to support it. It really sucks that they're not offering that to everybody for all standard DualSense controllers. There's no reason why. The Edge still has plenty of hardware and software features that differentiate it from a standard DualSense, but that one thing I think would be quite important for anybody that is suffering stick drifting issues, which, again, I still think that's largely a I don't want to say overblown, but something where we don't know how widespread it is, but those that have, stick drifting problems or any problems are going to be very vocal about it. But no matter how big or small the problem is, why not offering a software fix that might be very helpful to a lot of people running into this problem? That I wish they would do, but for now it's only on the DualSense Edge. Now, in other firmware news, we have a new report from Tom Henderson writing for InsiderGaming.com, and this one is again about the reports he's mentioned before, which is about the rumored 7.0 PS5 update for March, which would include Discord functionality. And he's more or less saying the same thing, but there's now new sources, or at least the same sources, saying that there's going to be something else in that firmware, which is PS5 game streaming. So this would apparently only be for PS Plus Premium users, but it has been in the testing phase for a few months now. And when it comes to the beta phase, which we always expect that's going to be coming up in a few days. and is also apparently going to conclude on January 30th. The only catch here is this beta will not allow Discord functionality or testing. So that means when the beta finally launches, you'll be able to use PS5 game streaming and also the other whatever else is in there, right? I mean, normally if it's a major PS5 update, we've seen so far that Sony includes about 25, 30, sometimes 40 changelog items. And oftentimes there's things that are not on the changelog directly. So there's a bunch of little tweaks and things like that on the PS5 UI that is always welcomed. But I assume that's what it's going to be. Now, PS5 game streaming, though, that is very interesting. So I've been expecting this for a while, and it seems like it's finally ready, and this is where I'm so curious as to what their solution is. I think the safe guess here is just standard PS5 retail units that are running some kind of modified firmware that is obviously, tailor-made to streaming. But, in theory, this is where they can reduce a lot of bottlenecks because, case in point, I think what they're looking to do long-term is just deploy a lot of PS5 server blades that can act as the blades needed for not only PS5 but PS4 game streaming as well. I mean, that much is obvious. It's backwards compatible, so why would you not have PS5s running all these PS4 games in the cloud? They can improve frame rate, resolution for games that have dynamic res, reduce load times, and of course there's some compatibility issues, but generally I think it's a net positive to just use PS5s, and that's where, because all those things are over streaming, that's the bottleneck. But if you're using a PS5 or if you're using some kind of specialized PS5 hardware, this is an opportunity to reduce latency considerably. And we've seen Sony has been very slow in this area, not only rolling out streaming to other countries, but just making streaming a good experience all around. So I want this to be a good opportunity for Sony to make streaming viable. So if this is true, then we'll see how it happens, but at least PS5 game streaming in theory is finally here for for premium users, which I know people don't care about streaming, but let's try and at least make it something that's worth checking out and using on a regular basis for most people and most internet speeds. Now, moving on to one of our big stories from this past week, which was a PlayStation 5 game leak on Sunday, where some footage came out that obviously wasn't meant to go out, and this kind of goes back to, if you remember from a few months ago, there was a leak list, which had a bunch of XDEV projects and a lot of European studios on that list, and so, for whatever reason, it seems like if it's XDEV or if they're a studio in Europe, there's just a good chance that it's going to leak nowadays, which is weird, but we can say this leaked game is not on that original list, so it is new, and it's something where it's a very brief clip, of course, but this was initially leaked by iconera.com, but I will say this footage was passed around a bit before they went to publish, and the story here is that this is a PlayStation Studios XDEV project in collaboration with an unknown developer. Though Modest on Reset Era did note that the word red in the bottom right corner is likely in reference to the codename used for a game in the concept stage at developer People Can Fly. They recently shipped Outriders under Square Enix, and that would be a reasonable connection to make because they know their way around, a third-person action game. They've also shipped Fortnite Save the World, Gears of War Judgment, Bulletstorm, and they've done a lot of code development stuff too. So with this, it's allegedly a sci-fi third-person action RPG being made in UE5, but as an XDEV project, Sony is also going to be directly involved, and this would probably fall under an IP that Sony would own, making this a PlayStation Studios game. So, the footage is, again, brief. You can't see much of anything outside of a goopy monster climbing up a tower or something, which, honestly, that alone, I don't know why, but, I looked at it and I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. I want to see more. And that's just all I need, right? More, something to make me want to see more, but should go without saying that it's a very early build, so there's no sense in judging it in terms of, judging it too much. There's nothing there to really judge outside of maybe some, again, kind of like the core concept of it, which is a goopy monster climbing up a tower, which makes me think, oh, what is that thing? But, Sony's doing a lot of XDEV stuff, which is, good. I mean, XDEV is a global effort now, so it's not just strictly European studios, but assuming it is People Can Fly, I mean, it all sort of lines up there. It's just, We'll have to wait and see. Apparently this build is very early, and there is one that's much further along now, so it seems like it's still going to be quite a while until we get like a formal reveal of this game, and that's assuming there's no major problems or hiccups or the game doesn't get canceled entirely. That's all very possible, but we're still likely years away from this thing actually showing up again, assuming there's also no more leaks. But it looks interesting enough, so it seems like there's now another XDEV project that is more or less out there. Moving on to some PS5 hardware news, it looks like Sony's going to be offering 2 new PS5 bundles fairly soon for both disc and digital versions, where both consoles will offer 2 DualSense controllers instead of 1, which these retailer listings showed up in Europe, and I think WinFuture and Zubitech spotted these before they were taken down, and there was a price, but I don't think it was accurate, so there's no recommended price just yet, but I assume it's something where it's going to offer a slight cost savings if you were to buy a PS5 and another controller separately. But kind of goes back to what we've seen with Sony so far with PS5, where lately they've really been favoring bundles with a bunch of games, or rather one game, but multiple different bundles they've done, and that ensures a higher average spend per box, so they're selling a game right off the top. And so with this, same deal. I mean, I would honestly recommend avoiding this bundle, if only because I think it's kind of worth buying a separate colored controller. So I like the white aesthetic of PS5, I really do, but you know, the white DualSense is just, it's hard to play with because it doesn't matter how clean your hands are, it's going to get dirty and filthy, and so you kind of have to like keep up with cleaning it every like week, 2 weeks. It's just kind of like a little too excessive. I always recommend, if you're going to do 2 controllers, just kind of go for anything that's colored to some degree, but that's just my suggestion. Otherwise, if you're in the market for a PS5 and you know you're getting 2 controllers, I can't say this is really going to be a bad deal, but we'll see if this is true relatively soon. Now, the other news for PS5 hardware is an update on the PS5 vertical situation, or PS5 vertical gate, I guess we'll call it, but something where, if you remember last week, we talked about how the keeping your PS5 in a vertical orientation apparently might be a bad thing, because we've seen repair shops talk about how the liquid metal in a vertical orientation might escape out of its chamber and thus pour out and possibly damage critical components. And so that could be an issue, right? And so we've actually got an update here from the original website that posted this as an article, wololo.net. So on Twitter, they say, and I quote here, "There was a critical misunderstanding on our end when we thought the coder," that was the one person on YouTube, "said the liquid metal problem happened on unopened inbox PS5s. What he said and meant was PS5s that have not been opened, the actual console, by other repair shops prior to him. The problem is still real as far as I know, but there is no evidence that it happens on consoles that have been sitting in their box. That part was a complete misunderstanding on our end. The damage is done, but I've updated the article." Now, over on YouTube, the coder also provided an update on this, explaining more about their background and how this is still an issue that seems to come up frequently, but also reiterating the point that I and many made, which is that, you know, so far at least, we just don't know how widespread this issue may or may not be, and that's something to really keep in mind, is that the problem may be real, but to what degree, how often, is it within the normal, you know, failure rate for consoles or, you know, consumer electronics? That we don't know. Which I would like to apologize as well, because I wish I had caught the context of that original video. Normally what I do whenever I source news, you know, I try to, if it's an article that I'm reading, I try to, you know, make sure they're sourcing correctly and follow the source to the very original place that it came from. And I like to read it or hear it or watch it myself to validate that that's what was being said, because some sites can make mistakes, but some sites can also, you know, try to push a certain narrative, or, you know, it's always important to get the context directly. So I didn't have time to do that last week because, again, it was just a whole ordeal, so I apologize that I also did not catch that. But with that said, you know, it kind of goes back to last week, where I'm not calling any of the repair shop owners liars or anything. I mean, this is what they do. Of course, they're seeing consoles that have problems, and of course, this is something that they are likely seeing very often. But it's just, you can't really take their word in the sense of how major or how widespread of a problem it could be, right? The most grounded, realistic scenario here is that consoles are failing, and this is one failure point that the PS5 may or may not have. And it's more about long-term, how the consoles do, right? So that's what I mentioned when it's like year 3, 4, 5, and we're talking upwards of 10 plus years. What's the best way to maintain these consoles and make sure that we understand some of the early failure points when they're also out of warranty, because we've now got a lot of PS5s out there that are out of warranty. And so that's why we've now got a story coming up about repair shops that are consistently working on PS5 consoles because they might be a more viable option versus going with Sony. Next up, The Last of Us HBO is coming very soon. Episode 1 is this Sunday, and so far at least, based on reviews, this show has been received very, very well. So Season 1 on Metacritic has a 82 across 32 different reviews, but Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 97% rating across 74 different reviews and critics. So yeah, this did really well. The general consensus does seem to be that this is one of the best, if not the best, video game adaptation going from, say, video game to TV so far, which I can see it. It's just that it's nuts to see how it did this well, but, the anecdotes and, kind of what we're hearing is that when you're walking into the show, if you've never played the games, then you're going to get a TV show that's fantastic from top to bottom. Of course, it's going to have that emotional ride that The Last of Us is known for, and you don't necessarily know what you're missing from having played the games. But if you did play the games, then it's just as good of an experience, if not better, because they've got certain scenes in there where it's, cut for cut, line for line, and they don't do it all the time, but they do it enough to where it feels like, you're rewarded for having played the games, but then there's so much more when it comes to exploring different characters, new scenes and things like that. It just seems like they balanced it really well. So I am excited to watch it, which is rare for me to say because I am just not huge into TV and film. I'm more casual with that stuff. So it's weird that I'm like this hyped for a TV show, and I won't be able to watch it right away. So my living room is not completely set up just yet. I'm waiting for my couch to be delivered, so I'm waiting for that. I want the TV mounted, so I want to get that all sorted out by at least Wednesday, and hopefully by then I can watch it. But yeah, it seems like it's gonna be good. But because the show is coming out so soon, Neil Druckmann, Craig Mazin, and the entire cast are kind of doing a press junket like we normally see with TV and film. And so recently Neil Druckmann was speaking with Gene Park of the Washington Post, and that's where Neil talked about a number of things relating to the show, the process, the games, a really good conversation, of course. But we also had Neil make a really interesting comment about Elden Ring, where he said he's intrigued by games like Elden Ring, or also Inside, but basically where they don't rely on traditional storytelling. Noting that these stories in these games, they are told in a way that lets the player try and figure it out, and you're trusting them to not, you're not going to hold their hand through the entire process. Neil says that doesn't necessarily mean not having dialogue or cutscenes for their games, but, something where they might take that methodology and those concepts and seeing what they can do with it. We also saw the co-game director at Naughty Dog, Vineet Agarwal, agree with this, where this clip was shared on Twitter by Okami Games, and Vineet says, and I quote here, "This is a major one for me as well. Talking with Miyazaki-san last month on Elden Ring, one thing we nodded on back and forth was trusting the player. It allows for a more fulfilling design both for the player but even the developer. It lets you do more, in fact, than less." This is absolutely one of those things where I can see how a lot of developers would maybe play Elden Ring last year and, walk away from that with an experience and thinking that, how can I take some of these ideas and concepts and apply that to what I'm doing and the work that I'm putting out there. And that's not to say that they're going to, more or less copy the From Software formula of, making a game that has very obtuse storytelling. Like it can be very obscure when you're playing Elden Ring or Bloodborne, Dark Souls. I mean, oftentimes people will play those entire games and not really know what happened outside of them playing a very difficult video game. So not to say it's going to be like that, but, trying to get the point across that's maybe outside of a cutscene, maybe something that doesn't require dialogue, and I think that's more or less what Neil's getting at least when they might want to explore that for their games. But it could also go into something like the gameplay hand-holding, which I've been seeing this a lot lately as a complaint, especially with, PlayStation games, which is that there's always the AI assistant or some kind of, assistive feature that's on by default, and you can't turn it on or delay it enough to where you're playing the game and somebody always has to chime in with, oh, look at that, I think this is how you do it, or I think you can climb that thing over there, right? They kind of are very talkative, and that annoys some people, and I get it, and I wish they would just make a toggle that, makes it easy to more or less get rid of that, but, it could be something like that, right, where it's less of the hand-holding. I actually would like to know if that kind of hand-holding has done well long-term with average completion rates for games, because in theory they've got to be working to some degree. I mean, there's a very long process of play testing and things that's why all those little dialogue cues are in there. You kind of have to account for that lowest common denominator when playing a game. That might not be the fairest way to put it, but some people can overlook something very easily, and I've had moments like that myself. So it's more about offering the option to say turn that off, but whether it is the gameplay hand-holding or finding a different way to tell your story without always incorporating, long dialogue through, say, a forced walking sequence, or, doing a cutscene that is a bit too long on the tooth. If you can do it another way, that's maybe more visually appealing and striking, I think that would be something that I would certainly enjoy seeing, and I think Naughty Dog would be the ones to really look at that and run with it. Now, something else very interesting that came up for Naughty Dog was, again, Neil Druckmann speaking with, this time, comicbook.com. They had brought up how, you've announced games like Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us Part 2 years in advance. And so how are they going to maybe change that or approach that, or, what's going on with The Last of Us multiplayer? And so Druckmann responded with, and I quote, "You're right, we did announce Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us Part 2 way in advance, but that actually caused a little bit of work-life balance issues that we've had sometimes at the studio. By delaying that announcement a bit, we could play with the schedule more, and we're now more conscious about how we're approaching production. So there's our multiplayer project, and there's another project that I will not say anything about that's beyond that we're also very much excited for." It does seem like most of PlayStation Studios already kind of follows this formula to some degree, just in that you're not going to show your game in a substantial way until it's far along enough to where it's going to release in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months. And that's the sort of the differentiator, is substantial. So we are seeing things get announced fairly early still, but it's kind of these weird informal ways, right? So whether it's something as direct as a job listing that says, yes, we have a new project, it's a new IP, here's the genre, we're hiring. And that's normally why they do that, because they're looking for talent. Or it could be something where they admit right away, like, yes, we're working on this IP. Like, hey, we're hiring for a Horizon multiplayer project. It might be a while until we see what it is, but at least we have a good idea of what it is going to be. And that could be something where it is a more formal reveal of, say, like the God of War teaser or the Spider-Man 2 teaser, Wolverine. Like, we know those games are far away, but, doing something like that. The concept art, just kind of giving a small taste, but not, doing these trailers one year, and then the next year is another trailer, the next year is another trailer, and then all of a sudden we're on year 4 and we're getting another trailer because that's finally the year where the game's coming out, and so then we get 4 or 5 different trailers and then a bunch of blog posts and things. So I think what they're trying to do is just, avoid all that baggage of the extra 3-something trailers every year, which are really just a massive resource hog, because the game's not, close to being finished. So you kind of have to make a really nice, pretty vertical slice as just a consumer-facing trailer, which, that's why a lot of publishers nowadays don't really do that cycle anymore. So I would prefer this, the cycle of, let us know what it is, whether you want to do a cool teaser for a state of play or just announce it casually during a job listing. It's cool if we have a general idea of what a developer is doing, but, when it comes to actually showing something substantial, I'm fine with not seeing it until, by the time we do see it, that means, oh, sweet, so this game's coming within the next, again, 6 to 12 months. And at that point, once we're in the later half of that, so it's like 3 months out, Sony has been starting a pretty large marketing cycle for these games, right? It's like, Ragnarok, we didn't see the marketing cycle really kick off for that game until like a month and a half before it came out. It was like, people were almost concerned. They're like, why isn't Sony talking about Ragnarok? This game's going to get delayed. But no, they went all out towards the end because it was on track to release. So seems like that's how they're going to do it with this game and many others. And that's also why I feel like this multiplayer project is going to be, playable by at least the second quarter of this year. I would hope that is the timeline we're looking at. If not, at least by the end of this year. But the fact that they're going to show it soon means it's probably going to be ready soon. And that also means their other project is very far away, which is fine. We can, theorize and speculate whenever a news story comes up or a rumor comes up, but for the most part, it seems like we're not going to know where that game is for years. Moving on to a PlayStation Vita news story, which is not often that we get these, right? Very rare, but thought this one was noteworthy because at least for this particular Jailbreak, which was recently released on PS Vita, it's the easiest one by far to utilize and do. It's super simple, works on all firmwares. You can do it right on the Vita, no computer required. You can even use a 1000 with no memory card. So it's very approachable, and this is something where I'm not really in the jailbreak scene. You all know that. We don't really do jailbreak stuff on this channel. No videos, no talking about jailbreaks often, at least. So I'm going to reference you to Mr. Mario 2011's channel. He did a very thorough guide on, not only how easy this is, but also some packages you can install once you're done. So it's very easy to follow. He's got a great guide on that. And, I'm always asked about PS Vita every so often. It's like, should I still get one? I've always been interested, but I don't know if, Vita's right for me or something. And it's like, I'll always recommend Vita to some degree. The big problem with Vita is that physical game prices are nuts, and I can't really condone that. At the same time, I'm not going to condone piracy, but Vita is still super cool in this moment to use it stock through the PS Store, which does still work. You can still make purchases. You can buy very cheap PS1 games. You can, buy PSP stuff on there. The Vita stuff is still priced better than the physical games, obviously, but you can do that. And when you do jailbreak, you can do some very interesting, cool things like putting ROMs on there, right? So there's just a lot of cool things you can do with a jailbroken Vita. And so having this this recent one being so accessible, I thought was worth pointing out for anybody that was looking into PS Vita. Moving on to our latest update for the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal. Recently, we had a new report from Bloomberg citing anonymous sources claiming that both Google and Nvidia have submitted new remarks to the FTC, claiming that they are, raising concerns about this deal, not directly opposing it, but the primary concern here is cloud gaming. So allegedly, Nvidia has not directly opposed the deal, but they are stressing the importance and the need for equal and open access to game titles. This kind of goes back to Brazil's CADE, where we saw a bunch of different respondents, and we saw the responses, obviously, and we saw that Sony was directly opposing it, big shocker. But the other ones were kind of neutral, or like, oh yeah, like in favor slightly, like there's plenty of competition and this and that, which those respondents were, either other game publishers or they weren't platform holders, obviously. So it's just something where like they either had no role or just wouldn't affect them, right? So we've seen that, and we've also seen a situation where if they're in the same sector and they may benefit from the deal, then they might be in favor of it. Nvidia has their own game streaming service, so their concern is kind of in line with Sony's, where it's they want to make sure they have access to Activision Blizzard titles, for the foreseeable future, because those are big games that without them, they are not going to look they're not going to look good. And Google, it's interesting because they willingly, exited the cloud streaming service, the cloud streaming segment. So it's almost like they're giving legitimate concerns or a fair answer of like, well, we just left the segment, so now there's already going to be less competition, and so we think that's something that you need to consider because we're not even going to be in there. Which is kind of a weird thing to even, humor, but, we've seen how Microsoft has been having to downplay the importance of cloud gaming, and, in the here and now, they're saying things like, we want to ship Call of Duty everywhere. Doesn't matter, PlayStation natively, we'll stream it, we'll offer it on Plus, we'll do 10-year agreements, and Of course, they'll say what they want to because they want the deal locked in. And the thing is, they're also happy to do 10-year agreements because at least, you know, when it comes to a growing category like cloud gaming, it's going to take 10-something years for it to really catch on. And that might be a time where Microsoft might not want to play ball anymore, and they might not sign a new contract that, you know, is another 10-year agreement, right? Like they could happily, you know, spend 10 years owning Activision Blizzard, shipping it everywhere and making a ton of money, and then by the time the numbers might make sense for them, you know, then they have a lot of valuable content for their cloud streaming services. And I don't want to, you know, paint Microsoft as the worst of the worst, and that's what they, you know, are going to do, but it's something they could do. It seems like NVIDIA is certainly more willing to, you know, like accept an agreement, right? Like, hey, we want a 10-year agreement like Sony and Nintendo, where Sony doesn't, you know, they don't want to accept a 10-year deal. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to acknowledge that they're okay with the deal. But it's interesting seeing how this would play out with Google and NVIDIA. You know, it makes sense, though. It's just, it would be a long time anyway for this to be a problem, but there's no denying that if Microsoft secured Activision Blizzard in that particular segment, they would have a substantial, there's substantial upside. Let's put it that way. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about with you all from this past week, and our Tuesday video was a sequel to a 2019 video, which was giving my friend $100. I said, buy me games, I'll open them blind. We did it again finally, bumped up the budget, go check it out, that was a lot of fun. The idea there with Terrell was we were going to film a few things ahead of time, and I would use those videos on Tuesday during my moving process to allow me to move without disruptions on the channel. So those videos are all used up now. Thank you, Terrell. It'll be a while until you see him again, but trust me, he'll come back eventually. And now I got to start making some uploads here and making this place a little bit better. So thank you again for bearing with me. And that's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.